everybody. Let's give it up for this incredible band. I always feel lucky when I get to be up there and play with them. Thanks for putting up with me. Welcome, everybody, to Dwell Church on this beautifully autumnal day. I pulled out a flannel. Getting real excited about that. It's probably a titch too warm for flannels, but I'm going with it. So glad you're here today. Dwell Church is 18 months old. We're founded on 5 core values. We want to be Jesus-centered, research-based, trauma-informed, diverse, and affirming and inclusive. And we're an experiment to see what it is like when we build a community based on those things. And we're on a quest. And that quest is to build a church where anyone can take a step closer to Jesus. So maybe you're just here for the first time. Maybe it's the only time. I hope it's not. I hope you love these people the way I have come to love them. But if it is, if you're only here with us for one 45-minute session, I hope that you feel a deep invitation to take a step closer to Jesus. And then also, if you would, connect with us right here. Get on our email list. The brave thing to do was to show up in person. The next small step is to just click on this QR code and get on our email list. But we're grateful that you're here. If you are new, make sure you get a mug. They're my favorite, and they hold my coffee every morning. Excited about that. We are in the midst of relaunching Dwell Kids. When we first started in Lisa's backyard, our kids ministry was a bubble machine. It was great. And at the very first meeting, we had way too many kids. And we intuited there that God was calling us to build a kids ministry that would serve them, that would shape them, that would disciple them over their lifetimes. And just like the amazing adults in this room, Dwell Kids is full of amazing human beings. And I'm so excited that we will get to watch what God does in their lives over many years. But we invested almost no money in that kids ministry for the first 18 months of this church. We were basically duct taping it together. And very brave people were going back there, wading into the trenches of being there unarmed, without any information or any technology or any supplies. And they did their best to love and serve those kids. So now we're investing a lot of money here. Part of the backstory is a couple years ago, we were the recipient of a $250,000 grant. And we knew that the second portion of that was going to come in 2024 or 2025. And we thought if we could arrive at financial sustainability, then most of that money could go towards kids and students. So this community discerned that this is the kind of church that we want to see ongoing in the world, and we became self-sustaining. It was really a miraculous thing. And what that allows us to do is invest all of that grant money in the relaunching of Dwell Kids. The first thing that we did was to hire a consultant, big fan of Dwell Church. We have like a fan club of people who are really brilliant, do all kinds of great ministry. And they offer all the time, can I help in some way? And so one of them, we said, yes, could we pay you to teach us how to build a real kids ministry instead of the facade that we had been putting up before? So we'll get to meet Leslie Stahl a few times a year, maybe once a quarter, as she coaches us through how to build this. Now here's why we have to build it ourselves. There is a question at the heart of what Dwell Church is. And that question is maybe the dissatisfaction that maybe we have felt with church over our lifetimes was actually the Holy Spirit calling us to reinvent the model in a way that makes our hearts come alive. And so we started asking, what would it be like for Dwell Church to be a new church for a new era? And we've been on that quest to figure out what that church looks like. And what we have learned along the way is someday, 500 years from now, there will be thriving churches, and we are maybe the generation who is deciding what those churches will look like and what it will mean for them to follow Jesus. And the same is true for our kids. We are the ones that will decide what the kids' ministry of the future looks like. So I want to invite you along on that journey. The second thing we have to do is onboard 10 new adults because it's actually against California state law to only have one adult back there. When you hire a consultant, they give you helpful information. One of them is you're breaking the law every single week. So we're onboarding 10 new people into Dwell Kids. Now we've jettisoned the word volunteer because you're not just volunteering time. What you're doing is building. Sometimes we're building an environment or a program, but what you're really doing at church and especially in kids ministry is building into another human being. You're building their future. You're building their internal world. One of the problems we have had is, actually we did have 2 adults back there a lot. I was just joking about breaking the law every week. Up until this summer, we did a pretty good job with that, except for the beginning when the only adult back there was my wife. Everyone tell her later after the service how appreciative you are of that. Good job. We had many seasons, many months of 2 adults back there. What we learned was it was a little tricky for them to figure out who does what. So now what we're trying to do is create a secondary role that has its own deep importance to it. We're calling it a culture captain. What their job is to do is to make sure that every kid who comes on a Sunday feels safe, known, and loved. So if you feel like, hey, I could take a room of kids and look each one of them in the eye and know their name and make them feel safe and known and loved, then this is the role for you. If you don't feel comfortable teaching or leading the games or whatever else might fall to a kids ministry builder at Dwell Church, that's okay. But if you feel like I could probably on a Sunday know and love 10 kids, that's who we're looking for these 10 people. I'm really grateful that about 5 or 6 have already signed up. We're looking for a few more. If that either of those things are not things that you would like to do, but you would like to build into the future of Dwell Kids, you can click that and we will negotiate through what you're capable of and find the right job for you. I'm excited about the future of Dwell Kids, and I want to reiterate that you all are the ones who made it possible. It is because we're self-sustaining that we can invest real time and energy into the future of these kiddos. So thank you for being that kind of awesome little church that we're growing into. Super fun. Okay, what else do we have here? Uh-oh, is my clicker working? Eddie, you're a ninja. Which button am I hitting here? There we go. All right, we've been in a series called The Spiritually Formed Imagination. How did it come to be? Every 6 months or so at Dwell Church, we have a Sunday like this where we sit around tables and we have a group project. And that group project starts with some personal reflection where people ask themselves, how am I actually doing spiritually? What are my actual unmet spiritual needs? And then after that, they ask themselves, if I had 4 weeks of Dwell Church to do whatever I think would be best, what would I hope that someone would say up front? What would we do? Would we do some crochet? Would we sit in a circle and sing a cappella? We could do anything. So what do I think we should do? And then they share that with their table. The whole table goes around and says, this is what I would do with my 4 weeks. And then that table would pick one of them to work out and to work on and to flesh out and to build into something actual. Then each table actually would stand up and say, this is our idea. If we had a month of Dwell Church, this is what we would do with it. From this last one, several tables said some version of this very urgent question. What are we supposed to do when it feels like the world is on fire? What do we do? Well, the world is burning. And part of the conviction of this series is that we are supposed to cultivate spiritually formed imaginations. What does this phrase mean? A spiritual formation is what happens to you over your lifetime, that your internal person becomes like something else. And the reality is that one way or another, every human being that will ever live is undergoing that kind of formation into one thing or another. You become like something over the duration of your life. And so as followers of Jesus, we've simply made the commitment that we're going to do whatever we can do to be formed in our internal world into the image and character of Jesus. He is the person we are hoping to be formed into. Now, what was Jesus like? What are his characteristics? There are helpful lists in the Bible called the fruits of the Spirit: sacrificial love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, generosity, and self-control. That's what we aspire to become like in our internal person, whatever it costs us. We are growing into the image of Jesus. That is how we undergo a spiritual formation. Now, what does the word imagination mean here? There's 2 ways to think about imagination. One, that people have said to me a lot, is I think that's probably in your head. I think you're just imagining that. There is a fictional element to an imagination, right? Something that is actually false, that does not correspond to reality. You're just imagining that. But there is another deeper and I think more important way that we can think of imagination, that every good idea, every invention, every bright vision for the future of the world, every movement in human history came from someone's imagination. That this reflects your God-given capacity to imagine what the future could look like. And so what we're doing here today, what we're doing in this series is saying, how do we become people who can imagine the future of the world in a way that would be pleasing to the person of Jesus? How do we imagine the world in such a way that we could build it into a place that pleased Jesus? That's the question here. So the goal for this series, wrong way, hit the wrong button. The goal is to have a spiritually formed imagination in such a way that opens up the future. Now, what does it mean for the future to be open? I'll give you some examples here in a moment. But let me tell you what it feels like for the future to feel closed. It feels like nothing you could do could make the world better. That the powers that be are so powerful, there's nothing we could ever do or say to stop them. It is the burden and the anxiety of there's nothing we could do or we don't know what it is that we could be doing to impact the future of our world. What you are experiencing there is the sensation of imagining the world, the future of the world, to be closed. So we're working together to have our imaginations healed so that we can open up the future, loosen it up a little bit, so that maybe we could build it into a future that would please Jesus. I want to give you some tools that we're working on along the way. The first is mental map of reality. You and I have a set of shared assumptions, sometimes not shared, a set of assumptions about how the world works. Maybe someone has said to you, "That's not how the world works, honey." People say that to me sometimes, and I think, wow, that was really offensive. I thought that's how the world did work. You have a set of assumptions about how the world works, and those assumptions are your mental map of reality. Let me give you one example. What is sometimes called the Lord's Prayer that Jesus taught his disciples that will become a feature of our next series as we pray through it. It begins, "Our Father in heaven," and if you think of heaven as a place that is far off and it is so far away that you have to scream across the void to get a hold of God over there, to convince him to come over onto your side, to do something fruitful in your life, if you think of heaven as very far away, then you are practicing your faith in a certain kind of way. But there's a growing chorus of voices, including the philosopher Dallas Willard and the world's preeminent New Testament theologian Tom Wright, who said that in the New Testament, actually, heaven is depicted as a place that is designed to overlap with our world. And one day it will be integrated together, so that some scholars say, instead of the word heaven, we should translate it the phrase, "closer than my very breath." That somehow God knows you better than you know yourself. And heaven is merely the place where he is fully present. And so when we say heaven, what we're really thinking about is the God who is closer than our very breath that we're breathing right now. So how different would life be if we constantly prayed, "God, who I know to be closer than my very breath"? It's a different map of how reality works. That's one tool we'll be working with here. We're asking for Jesus to heal our maps of reality. The task is to imagine alternative futures, alternative worlds in a way that opens up the future. The capacity that we've been working on is feeling more than one thing at a time. Right in the center of the Bible are 150 Psalms. Roughly half of them ask you to feel one thing and then a few verses later feel a very different thing. You can feel angry at God and then you can praise him. You can feel a sense of being lost in the wilderness and then a deep, profound hope that God will come to your rescue. And not only is half of the Psalms about that, there's also an episode of Daniel Tiger that is about that. So whenever the Psalms and Daniel Tiger are saying the same thing, we can be pretty sure that it is true. Very important. And then the call that you and I are invited to do, the vocation we are given by God himself, is to be priests, prophets, and part of his royal family. A priest lives perpetually in the presence of God. A prophet has a healed imagination in such a way that they can imagine the future of the world as more pleasing to Jesus. And a member of God's royal family has the capacity to make it so. This is what you and I are called to live out in the world. So today, what does it mean to open up the future? I want to give you a few examples. Last time I gave a bunch of examples. Now I pared them down for time. We'll see if that makes this sermon any shorter. Probably doesn't. We talked about Isaiah chapter 2. It's beautiful. You should read it. Here's Isaiah chapter 11, a shortened version. Isaiah is part of a conquered peoples. They have been conquered by a foreign army and deported. Their towns have been burned. And yet Isaiah imagines a future where one day the wolf will live with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the goat, and the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. This is a tranquil future for the world, dreamed up by a conquered people. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. And neither will they harm nor destroy any on my holy mountain. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. For Isaiah and his people, his imagination is of an open future where despite their conquered and deported status, the story is not over. And I want to give you a modern, contemporary version of this. It's 2030. You've just finished your 4-day work week. The grifters have lost power. Culture has shifted. Less fear, more music. The ads are gone, and in their place, wildflowers, murals, and solar panels. Big oil has collapsed under the weight of truth. Military shrank. Care grew. Public transport hums through tree-lined streets. We grow well-being, not gross domestic product. Education is valued, free, fun, and lifelong. Children learn from land and from elders. No one extracts your attention, and no one sells your despair. We are imagining an open future. And how good does it feel to just breathe for a minute and imagine that the future could be open like that? So we have talked about having sadness without despair, imagining sadness in a different way. God himself is sad at the state of the world. So when you are sad, what you are doing is becoming somehow like God. We want to have joy without escape. We imagine that the only way to have joy is by escaping. That's why we're the most entertained and addicted country in the history of the world, because our working assumption is to have joy, you must escape. How do we have joy without escaping? Today we'll talk about how to have hope without naivety, but underneath all of these is the challenge to feel scared but not live afraid. That's what we are called to do. It would be natural or normal to feel scared at the state of the world sometimes. That is because you and I are limited creatures that will one day die. Our animal instincts tell us when things aren't going well, this is scary. And yet, as we will see, if we choose to live life under the care of the shepherd, we do not have to live in fear. One of the things we have said through this is that God is sad and prayerful sadness is sacred. That is the way we have sadness without despair. There are great stories about Jesus weeping at the tomb of his friend Lazarus and then resurrecting them. How could you weep knowing you will resurrect him? It is because you are sad without having despair. And then we said we could have joy when we live life under the care of the shepherd, because the shepherd is the most joyful being in the universe. Joy was first. It is inherent to God. It is part of his character. Then he made creation, and things went wrong there. The sadness that we feel is quite secondary. It is very real, but it is secondary to the joy that is inherent to God's being. So, joy is resistance, and joy fuels resistance. Can anyone tell me if I'm getting these semicolons right? It's kind of bold to use a semicolon in public now, because you might get it wrong and someone will be like, hey, it's not how you do semicolons. I think that's pretty good. In a world that does not want to see you thrive, thriving is resistance. But also choosing to live a joyful life fuels the resistance work that you and I might one day be called to do. Joy is resistance, but it also fuels resistance. So today, we're talking about hope without naivety, as we ask God to heal our imaginations so that we could have spiritually formed imaginations. And the way I want to get into this is to talk about camping with my dad. The way my dad tells it, some of you have met him, is that he had a boring desk job being a corporate lawyer his whole life. And so on vacations, he needed to do something that was invigorating and outdoorsy. So my entire life, every vacation that we went on, we came back exhausted or maybe injured. Here are a few examples. And he had a strange way of preparing our family, or especially me, for going on these trips together. So we were going to do sea kayaking in Alaska. It was amazing. There were glaciers and seals. And as we were leading up to this trip, my dad was like, hey, we should watch the movie Into the Wild. Have you ever seen it? It's about this guy who sells all his possessions and moves to Alaska. And I was like, oh, no. How does he do? And my dad said, he dies. He dies. One time, a bunch of guys from my high school and my dad and I were going to go canoeing in Canada and in Minnesota. And you fish and you camp out of your canoe. It's really fun. And my dad was like, hey, beforehand, we should have all the guys come over and we'll watch the movie Deliverance, which is about some guys that go on a camping trip. And I was like, oh, Dad, did they have a fun time in that movie? No, unspeakably horrible thing happens to them. They're psychologically scarred for life. We should watch it. So we did. My dad's favorite one of these stories, though, is of Ernest Shackleton captaining the Endurance. This is a story in the eve of World War I. This guy is going to lead an expedition to the South Pole. He famously puts an ad in a British newspaper that he needed brave men for a job where the chances of survival were very slim. And all these guys showed up because they wanted to work with Shackleton, and they wanted to go on this great adventure. And then he sailed to Antarctica, and they were on their way there. And then their boat, the Endurance, got stuck in that ice floe. And it was stuck for over a year while they camped beside it and ate seals and lived on the ice in the ice floe while the ice slowly ate the entire ship of the Endurance. Eventually, their ship succumbed to the power of the ice. And so they made a plan to take the lifeboats and sail to the 350 miles to the nearest place across the Antarctic Sea. And they did. And all 28 guys made it there. And then they knew that no other boat would ever come there, so they were going to have to sail another 15 days. So Ernest Shackleton took half of the crew in 2 of the lifeboats, and they sailed 15 more days to a whaling station where they flagged down a ship and went back and picked up the other guys. And after 457 days, these guys were rescued. All 28 of them survived. And my dad loved this story because of the power of Shackleton's leadership, his resolve, his sense of hope, his sense of purpose. It's interesting about Shackleton that he had a reputation for being a pirate. He was a womanizer and drank too much, and this was a lot of bluster. But he grew up Quaker, and he wrote in his journal that somehow, as they were sailing 15 days with only half their crew across the Antarctic Ocean, that there was a fourth presence there guiding him. My dad loved this because it is a story about the human spirit. I loved it because finally someone survived. All the other ones, the people died. So I was really grateful that we finally got one that had a good ending before we went camping. We are going to talk about the relationship between hope and endurance as we learn to have hope without naivety. The naivety problem is this. We have the belief that the things I hope for will not be extremely costly. That is one of our intuitions about how the world should work. We drank deeply from the idea that the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And having heard that 50 years later and not been there when that was a costly thing to say, we thought, well, I guess it will just keep bending. That seems to be the way that statement works. In a couple of weeks, we'll talk about America in the wilderness. We'll talk about the fear and idolatry of the Republicans. And we'll talk about the intuition of progressives like us who thought it would be much easier than it actually is going to be. There is naivety in thinking that it won't be extremely costly. But how do we have hope knowing there will be a very real cost? That it will require a very real endurance. That's what we're talking about. Some research around the psychology of hope that I think is really helpful. They put together, Dr. Snyder here put together an inventory. So you can ask yourself, how hopeful of a person am I? And they did all kinds of studies about what phrases capture true hope. Because there's a kind of hope that feels more like a wish, a Hail Mary. I hope one day that I could do this. Well, without an action plan, that doesn't feel like a very real hope, right? So how do they measure very real hope? This is it. Now, from 1 to 4, you can say about yourself, this is 1 being definitely false, or true definitely, or 4 definitely true. This is how they came to measure accurately the sensation of hope within someone. Number 1, I energetically pursue my personal goals. That's what a hopeful person feels like. 2, I can think of many ways to get out of a jam. 3, past experiences have prepared me well for the future. 4, I believe that there are lots of ways around a problem. 5, I have felt that I am pretty successful in life. 6, I can think of many ways to get the things in life that are most important to me. 7, I tend to meet my personal goals. 8, even when others get discouraged, I have no doubt about finding a way to solve the problem. How many were you able to say definitely true to? How many were you going to say, I can sometimes do that? Dr. Snyder gives us a definition that is more action-oriented than wish-oriented. Wrong way. There we go. I got a new clicker. It works better. I don't know how the buttons work yet. Dr. Snyder wrote, in simpler terms, hope is the belief that you can both come up with many ways to reach your goals and have the motivation and energy to use those paths available to you. Real, costly, on the ground, bloody knees, fat lip kind of hope feels like there are many ways to reach my goals and I have the energy and the motivation to arrive at them. Let's put this into the idiom we've been using about opening up the future. It would sound like this. I believe that there are many ways, in fact, to open up the future, and I am motivated to pursue them with endurance in costly ways. And Dr. Snyder's research is helping us think about, I don't have hope. This is describing much more of a characteristic. I am hopeful. We don't have hope. It might feel like that sometimes because it comes and goes. Slowly but surely, we will develop into the kind of people that are always hopeful in this way. So how might we do that is the question. How do we become people of that kind of hope? Or put differently, 1 Peter 3:15, very famous verse. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord and always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. As a kid, I was taught that this meant go argue with atheists and beat them in a debate where you quote Bible verses at them until they come to believe what you believe. That has nothing to do with this. It's not that I am giving the reasons for I believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus, even though I have those. It's that I'm giving reasons that explains why I've become a person that has the characteristic of hopefulness. That's what I am to explain. So how do we become the kind of person that is able to give the reason for the hope that we have? I think it has something to do with the gospel. There is an old gospel that most people know, that Jesus died somehow for our personal sins and mistakes, so that one day when we die, we might go to heaven. And some of those things are true and important. The death of Jesus is the most important thing that has ever happened in human history, and his resurrection is what gives us the hope that we are talking about. But if we thought that him dying for our personal sins so that we could escape this world and go to heaven was the gospel, it would be too small. New Testament scholars tell us that the gospel is so much more grand and majestic. That God was announcing his final arrival into human life, into the world that we live in. That Jesus removed the obstacles so that God's presence could be fully available to us. That heaven and earth are designed to interlock like this, and Jesus' life was the beginning. So that you and I can expect over time to grow closer to Jesus. That is the good news. It is a different mental map of reality. I want to double click on this for a moment. I made this helpful little schematic here. If I think that following Jesus, being a Christian, is about action, two bad things can happen. The first is, if I do all the right actions, instead of think about my relationship with God as being living in his presence, if I do all the right things, what happens is that I become really excited about how good of a person I am. If I define my life with God as my actions, I become self-righteous about being a great person. Or, worse, I misidentify what God is asking me to do, and I become very excited about doing things that are completely antithetical to what God would have asked me to do. I do the opposite of what God would ask me to do because I've defined my life around actions, and I've settled on the wrong actions. And that is how some people in our world have said the best thing the church could be doing is deporting immigrants. They have identified the wrong action and said the most important thing about you is what you do. Now, we could say that the most important thing about being a Christian is what you believe. What happens when we settle here is that we think that we are right, and we become dogmatic and unflexible because we have said, my beliefs are my most important thing about me. I have all the right beliefs, and I'm willing to try to convince you that you do not. Instead, we have said here at Dwell Church that the center of the target for human life is a daily relational conversation with Jesus. It is a union that I experience of living daily in God's presence. And here's where this becomes very powerful. I need the shepherd to guide me to know which actions I should do. I need his wisdom to know which actions are right for me. I need Jesus himself to explain or reveal things about himself to me. This is what the Apostle Paul always says. I pray that God would reveal more about himself to you. I need to live in the presence of the shepherd so that I can learn more about the shepherd. So we are centering our lives not on doing the right thing, not even on believing the right thing, but on daily interacting with Jesus because we need his help to do the other things. And it turns out this was always the center of the gospel. Not that I would believe the right thing so that I could escape and go to heaven, but that I would arrange my life in such a way that I would have daily interactions with the shepherd himself. And slowly over time, that is how we become hopeful people. Putting all these pieces together. How do we put together the grander gospel, the hope as we have defined it, and what you actually do with your life? Here's a bit from a book called Simply Christian. You're going to feel like I read most of this book to you. I'm going to read less than I had planned because we're getting close to the time here. I'm also going to read really fast. Tom Wright helps us put these pieces together. Despite what many people think within the Christian family and outside of it, the point of Christianity is not to go to heaven when you die. The New Testament picks up from the Old Testament the theme that God intends in the end to put the whole creation into the right status. Heaven and earth were made to overlap with one another, not fitfully, mysteriously, and partially as they do at the moment, but completely, gloriously, and utterly. The earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea. That is the promise which resonates throughout the Bible story, that God's presence is coming to us. This is the message of Isaiah, all the way through Paul, and finally to the book of Revelation. That the great drama of the world's history will end, not with saved souls being snatched up into heaven, away from the wicked earth and the mortal bodies which have dragged us down into sin, but with the new Jerusalem coming down from heaven so that the dwelling place of God is among humans. Skipping that part for time. Paul, John, and Jesus himself, and pretty well all the great Christian teachers of the first two centuries stressed their belief in resurrection. That resurrection doesn't mean going to heaven when you die. Instead, it means that all things will be created new. Call it heaven if you like, but don't imagine that that is the end, that you get to escape. I'm constantly amazed that many contemporary Christians find this confusing. It was second nature to the early church and to the subsequent Christian generations. It is what they believed and taught. If we have grown up believing and teaching something else, like that we might one day escape, it's time we rub our eyes and read the Bible again. God's plan is not to abandon this world, the world which he said was very good. Rather, he intends to remake it. And when he does, he will raise all of his people to new bodily life to live in that new creation. This is the promise of the gospel. And so what does your life have to do with what will one day become the new creation? The Bible has this strange list that has always perplexed me. It's the list of crowns, imperishable crowns, the crown of rejoicing, the crown of righteousness, the crown of life, the crown of glory, the victor's crown. I've always thought this is like a mysterious and weird list in the Bible. What it tells you is that what you do now will somehow be recognized when God resurrects the entirety of the world. That what you do now will echo into eternity, into God's future. See, the sensation of hope is knowing that your life matters, that what you do matters. The future is open as long as you believe that your life matters, that what you do counts. And this strange list here is telling you that in God's mind, what you do with your life counts. And it is not because one day what you have done will get you an entry ticket into an escape that is heaven, but it is that everything that you do becomes part of the new creation. Every good deed you do will become one facet of the new world when God resurrects it. Tom Wright puts it like this: what you do in the present by painting or preaching or singing or sewing or praying or teaching or building hospitals or digging wells or campaigning for justice or writing poems or caring for the needy, loving your neighbor as yourself will last into God's future. These are not simply a way of passing the time until the real thing begins. They are the real thing. The good deeds you do are the real future of God in embryo form. That what you do will be remembered and implemented in the future of the universe is what it means that one day you and I will have crowns in heaven. What is amazing about that is scholars tell us maybe in the new creation there will not be hierarchy or competition, so that a crown is simply something that is celebrated. That one day all of the costly good things that you and I do will be celebrated by all of humanity as a fundamental facet of the new creation. That everything you do matters. That is where our hope comes from. As we live or learn to live under the care of the shepherd, he is guiding us to build into God's future. And what we are called to do is ask him to heal our imaginations in such a way that we too can start to imagine what God's future might be like. Let me pray for you. Jesus, for my friends here, will you teach us? Will you teach us, Jesus, to live our lives in the care of the shepherd? Will you teach us to become people of hope so that we can find multiple avenues to solve the problems that we are facing, knowing that you are with us. Jesus, we surrender our lives to you. Amen.